Every August, an NFL team fires about a third of its own locker room in one afternoon. Not for scandal, not for failure, because a rule says it has to. 90 players report to training camp. 53 are still standing when the season starts. The rest find out in a hallway, in a meeting room, in a phone call that comes before breakfast. And the strange part is that the number 53 isn't really where the story ends. There's a second roster hiding underneath it, and it changes how you understand the whole thing. So here's what I want to answer. Why does American football, a sport with more specialists than any other team game on the planet, force its clubs to carry so few players? Because on paper, it makes no sense. A soccer club can register a big senior squad and stash the rest in a reserve side, and nobody blinks. An NFL club has to look at 90 men in helmets and pick 53. And the answer isn't really about the game. It's about competition and about a bargain between the league and its players that most fans have never read a word of. Start with the shape of the sport. An NFL team is really three teams wearing the same colors. Offense, defense, special teams, they almost never share personnel, and none of them are on the field at the same time. A quarterback stands next to a punter, who stands next to a nose tackle, and all three do jobs that have nothing to do with each other. That's why NFL rosters have always been bigger than a soccer squad's match day group. And it's also why the cutdown hurts so much, because you can't just keep your best 53 players. You have to keep a working set. Think about what a working set actually means. You need a backup quarterback, because if the starter goes down and you have nobody, your season is over on a Sunday afternoon. You need enough offensive linemen that a single problem doesn't collapse the whole front. You need a long snapper, a genuine specialist whose entire job is a handful of snaps a game, and every team carries one anyway, because the alternative is a botched field goal that cost you a playoff spot. So the 53 isn't a ranking. It's a jigsaw. And that's where the coaching staff starts making decisions that look cruel from outside. Now walk through the calendar, because the calendar is the pressure. Clubs open training camp in late July, with a roster capped around 90. Pre-season games follow. Exhibition matches that don't count for standings and that starters barely play in. Which sounds pointless until you realize what those games actually are. They're the audition. A rookie free agent who nobody drafted gets 4 quarters of live football in front of coaches holding a list with too many names on it. Those snaps are the whole reason preseason still exists. And then, in the last days of August, the list gets cut to 53. It used to be gradual. For years, the league staged the cuts in waves, trimming the roster in steps across the preseason, so players got a few small executions instead of one big one. Then the rules changed, and it became a single deadline. One day. Everybody at once. Which sounds more brutal, and in a way it is, but it also means every borderline player gets the maximum number of practices and preseason snaps to make his case. Nobody loses his shot in week 1 of camp because of a bad Tuesday. And what happens right after that deadline is the part fans consistently misread. The moment a player is released, he doesn't just vanish into civilian life. He hits waivers. For a short window, every other club in the league can claim him, and the claiming order runs worst record first. So the weakest teams get first look at everybody else's leftovers. That's the competitive logic buried in the whole system. A good team can't hoard talent it doesn't have room for. because the second it lets a player go, a bad team can take him. The Cutdown is a redistribution event dressed up as a deadline. And there's a second door too. That second door is the practice squad. This is the roster hiding under the roster, the thing I teased at the start. Once the cuts are made, clubs build a separate group of players who train with the team all week but aren't on the active 53 on game day. They're developmental. They're insurance. They run the opponent's plays in practice so the starters see something close to what's coming Sunday. And a practice squad player can be elevated or signed onto the active roster during the season, which means the cut list is not a final verdict. It's a holding pattern. So follow the path a fringe player actually walks. He signs after the draft with no guarantees. He gets camp, he gets preseason snaps, he gets cut on the deadline, he clears waivers because nobody claims him. His old team offers him the practice squad, and he takes it because being in the building is better than being outside it. Then in October, somebody on the active roster can't play, and he's elevated for a game. That's a real career path, walked by more NFL players than most fans would guess, which raises the obvious question about the players on the other side of that line. Because the 53 isn't safe either. It's a game day roster of 40-something on top of that, which means even players who survive the cut sit some Sundays in street clothes, and teams are constantly churning the bottom of the list all season, signing, releasing, reshuffling as the schedule grinds people down. The Cutdown in August is just the loudest version of something that never really stops. Coaches will tell you the hardest week of their year isn't a playoff week. It's the week they have to tell grown men who did everything asked of them that there wasn't a slot. Here's the turning point in understanding all of it. The 53 is not a football number. It's a negotiated number. Roster limits, practice squad sizes, and the cut-down calendar all live inside the collective bargaining agreement between the league and the Players Association. They get discussed, argued over, and revised when that agreement is renewed, which is why the number has moved over the decades and why the practice squad has grown. Every one of those figures is the outcome of a bargaining table, not a coach's tactical preference. The board decides how the game is played, but the contract decides who gets to be there. And once you see that, the cruelty starts to look like design. A hard limit forces every club to make the same painful choices with the same amount of space. Waivers push the released talent downhill toward the weakest teams. The practice squad keeps developing players inside the system instead of losing them entirely. Every piece is pointed at the same goal, which is keeping 32 clubs close enough together that any given Sunday is genuinely in doubt. The NFL didn't build the Cutdown to be humane. It built it to keep the league level. Those are different things, and the difference matters. The legacy of that design is a league where roster construction is a discipline in itself. Front offices employ people whose whole job is the arithmetic of who fits where, and coaching staffs draft contingency plans for injuries that haven't happened yet. Preseason survives, not because anybody enjoys watching it, but because it's the only live evidence the decision makers get. If you're finding this useful, subscribe, because we take one rule like this apart every week and show you the machinery underneath it. And the machinery looks completely different once you cross the Atlantic. In soccer, there's no equivalent cut-down day. Clubs register squads for competitions, and those lists have limits, particularly in continental tournaments, but there's no single afternoon where a third of the training group is dismissed by rule. Players who don't fit go out on loan or drop into the reserve and youth setups or wait for the transfer window to open a door somewhere else. The pressure gets spread across months and across a whole pyramid of leagues. Nobody sits in a hotel meeting room in late August waiting to learn if they still have a job by Friday. That difference isn't an accident either. Soccer has promotion and relegation, an open pyramid, and clubs that exist below and beside the top division. A player squeezed out at a big club can go find football at a smaller one and keep his career alive. The NFL is a closed league of 32 clubs with no tier beneath it. So when the door shuts, there's genuinely nowhere in American football to walk to. The practice squad exists partly to fill that gap. It's the NFL's answer to a reserve league it never built, which flips the usual comparison on its head. We tend to say American sport is the ruthless one and European soccer is the romantic one. On roster rules, it's almost the opposite. The NFL's hard limits, its waiver order, and its practice squads are all engineered to hold the league together and stop the strong from stockpiling. Soccer's open system is softer on individual players and far harsher on individual clubs because a bad season can drop you a division. Both are honest answers to the same question. They just protect different things. So when you see the headlines in early September, 90 down to 53, understand what you're actually looking at. Not a purge, a pressure valve, written into a labor agreement, designed so that every club in the league starts the season with exactly the same amount of room, and none of them can buy their way out of the squeeze. The list is brutal at the individual level and deliberately fair at the league level. That tension is the entire American sports model in one August afternoon. And the men who survive it aren't the 53 best athletes in the building. They're the 53 who fit, which is a completely different test. And it's why the last few names on any NFL roster tell you more about how a coach thinks than the first 11 ever will. Next time, we're going the other direction. Soccer's transfer window has a deadline too, and it produces its own kind of chaos on a single day. Same pressure, opposite rulebook, and the reasons why say a lot about both games.